friends. Welcome to a brand new Scott Fox After 9. Today is an episode where I'm going to talk about interest rates. These ones are popular. Whenever interest rates comes up, I mean, it's something that affects so many people. I always get a lot of response, and that's good because tomorrow is the listener DM episode. Every Friday is. On Fridays, I turn this over to you, and you can send me a DM about whatever you want. You can call me out. You can make a point. You can have a compliment. You can trash me. You can do whatever you want in listener DMs on Friday. Just send them to me at Scott Fox on air on all of the major platforms, and I will put together a whole good collection of DMs for tomorrow's episode right here on Scott Fox After 9. Today, I am going to talk about interest rates. I'm also on this episode going to talk a little bit about speed enforcement cameras because I took my own advice. One of the things I would love to see is people get a little more involved in politics and in civics and take an interest in what's going on in your community. In my community, I live in Burlington, Ontario. Just yesterday, they launched their new speed enforcement camera program. And the timing on that is wild, as other cities are getting rid of them because the people don't like them and because there's really no evidence to suggest that they actually improve public safety. Burlington is launching them. So I've now officially put the invite out to my local mayor to come on the podcast and debate me. I think it'd be good if someone who believes in these cameras and will directly benefit financially from these cameras wants to come on and talk to someone who doesn't think that they're about public safety. I think that that would be a great service for you, the listener. But it's up to the mayor. I've put the invite out. It was direct to her, and we'll see if she takes me up on that. I also went the extra mile and emailed my local city councilor, and I told him I don't support these cameras. The response I got was a bit of a disappointment. It was just a sort of a stock response, and it cited that sick kid survey that all the mayors are using and a whole bunch of examples about Toronto, but not about my local area and why the issue is so clear and present as a danger there. So we'll go the mayor route, but either way, I have certainly made it known to my local officials that as a resident, I don't support those cameras. And I highly encourage you to do the same thing. Your city councilors, your mayors, if you think these are nothing more than a cash grab, then you've got to reach out and let your local elected officials know, and that can make a difference. I've seen it happen on other issues. So thank you to everybody who's already done that. And if you haven't, I highly encourage it. The other thing I'm going to talk about on this pod, and I know that this is a sensitive one, and many people have already made up their mind. I'm going to talk about Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel's show has now been canceled. Well, sort of. They're saying it is preempted. I don't know that it's actually canceled yet. And here's the thing. The mainstream media is going nuts over this one. They say it's the end of free speech, and they say this is cancel culture and things like that. And I certainly understand the argument, and on the surface, maybe it seems that way. I have a little bit of experience as a broadcaster that I can bring to that conversation, and I'm going to do that when I talk about Jimmy Kimmel. Here's the thing, though. You've got to keep an open mind as I'm explaining it. I know there's some people who want to be angry about this because they don't like President Trump. I know there's people who are angry about this because they think it is cancel culture and they think they see a hypocrisy. Whereas the right used to complain about cancel culture, namely because it was always people on the right being canceled, then they think this is hypocritical that the right is happy that Jimmy Kimmel has been preempted. I disagree there. I personally don't support cancel culture. I believe in if you don't like something, don't consume it. Turn it off. You don't have to watch Jimmy Kimmel if you don't want to. That's the way I would like to see this handled, but I don't even think that it's the same situation. I'm going to explain why after I play the clip from Jimmy Kimmel that has generated so much controversy and, in my estimation, a little bit of disinformation as well. This is Jimmy Kimmel the other night.
We had some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. and it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. Demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish, okay?
Okay, there's the comment. The story here is that Jimmy Kimmel did that bit, and many people felt it was in poor taste. Many people felt that he shouldn't have said that, and even if he does feel that way, some things you just don't say. Not especially when this is still fresh and a lot of people are still grieving. Let me read you the story as it's written today by the Associated Press. ABC has suspended Jimmy Kimmel's late night show indefinitely following his comments this week about the killing of Charlie Kirk and his alleged assassin. The network's decision last night came after Nexstar announced its ABC affiliates would preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live over his Monday night monologue. Like CBS's late night host Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel has consistently been critical of U.S. President Donald Trump. CBS recently said it was canceling Colbert's show at the end of the season, citing financial reasons. From his state visit in Britain last night, Trump posted on Truth Social, "Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done." He also targeted two other late night hosts, Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers, and said they should be canceled next, calling them two total losers. It's no doubt, no secret, President Trump does not get along with most of Hollywood. He doesn't. They don't like him, and he doesn't like them. Okay, we understand that. So the reason I think that the Jimmy Kimmel thing happened is the third line of that story. The network's decision last night came after Nexstar announced its ABC affiliates would preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live. So basically what that means is someone at Nexstar, which is a very popular conglomerate, big conglomerate, they own a number of television stations. Someone there did not like what Jimmy Kimmel said. They likely got a lot of complaints, so they said they were taking it off all of their stations. Then the FCC got involved. The FCC would be like the American equivalent of the CRTC. See, one of the things I think we need to point out here is a distinction. There's broadcast and there's podcast. And in podcast, basically anything goes. No one's really clearly defined what the rules of a podcast are. And that's why you hear a lot of stuff that would probably never make it on broadcast airwaves. Okay, that's fine. When someone consumes a podcast, they are making a deliberate choice to consume that podcast. It's also digital and delivered through platforms. It's a little bit different, though, when we're talking about broadcast. Broadcast means exactly that. It's available to mass amounts of people and typically for free. It's included with your cable. ABC is a network that carries many different shows and broadcasts them all around the world, but primarily in America. ABC, by the way, is owned by Disney. So ABC, knowing that one of their major customers, Nexstar, who pays to carry the Jimmy Kimmel Live show, they wanted Jimmy Kimmel gone. Then the FCC announced they were going to do an investigation into what Jimmy Kimmel said. And that led to ABC saying, you know what, we're going to pull the plug on this show for now. It is indefinitely suspended. Could come back. I don't know if it will, though. There's a couple things about this. When you broadcast, you have a bit of a responsibility. You're held to a different standard than if you had just done a video for social media or recorded a podcast. Because broadcast is available to the masses, you are held to a different standard. The airwaves belong to everybody. The license belongs to the government. And you have to follow certain, some written and some unwritten rules about when you broadcast. And putting out the message that Jimmy Kimmel put out, I'm not going to judge it, by the way. I am in no position to judge Jimmy Kimmel. I'm not a fan. I don't watch the show, and I haven't for a very, very long time. I personally don't find Jimmy Kimmel funny. But I also don't want to celebrate somebody losing their job because I've lost my job in the past. If Jimmy Kimmel said something and it was offensive and he did it in a broadcast format, that invites the criticism. That invites the conversation about whether or not what that person said was appropriate for broadcast and whether or not that person should be allowed to continue broadcasting, or if there's a likelihood that they could keep going, that they could reoffend. It's a tough decision that the FCC has got to make. And here in Canada, well, we do have the CRTC. It's actually another organization called the Canadian Broadcast Standards Council, CBSC, that would actually make the judgment on what was said and whether or not it was appropriate for broadcast. So we have two different layers of what would I call that? Oversight here in Canada. In America, it's just the FCC. And yeah, the director of the FCC in America is appointed by the government. It would be appointed by Donald Trump. Here in Canada, the chair of the CRTC, that person is appointed by the government of the day. I don't know whether or not Donald Trump picked up the phone and phoned the FCC and said, I want Jimmy Kimmel canceled because of what he said. I don't know if it was like that. What seems more likely is that because Nexstar, someone there was offended and they were going to pull their stations from the Jimmy Kimmel network, this was probably a good excuse for ABC to say, hey, listen, this show is not getting very good ratings. It does not make any money, and we pay Jimmy Kimmel a heck of a lot of money to do this show every single night that nobody's watching. I feel like this was probably an opportunity for ABC to save themselves some money. CBS flat out said when they got rid of Colbert that they were getting rid of Colbert because of financial reasons. And a lot of people read into that and thought, oh, that's the interference from Trump again. I mean, maybe there was interference from Trump, but it doesn't change the fact that the ratings on that show were very low as well. Generally speaking, mainstream media television ratings are nothing like they used to be. And that makes it very difficult, particularly when the economy is slowing, for these broadcast outlets to make money. I have a feeling that Jimmy Kimmel probably regrets what he said. I think he believes what he said, but I think he regrets that he said it on television. If Jimmy Kimmel had done a podcast or a social media video and said the exact same thing, he would be open to scrutiny from all of us. Absolutely. And people would decide if they want to continue consuming his content based on what he said. When it's in a broadcast setting where the license actually belongs to the American people, that's a little bit different. And like I said a few minutes ago, you're held to a different standard when you're broadcasting. Did ABC exploit this and see this as a window of opportunity to save themselves some money and cut bait with Jimmy Kimmel because the ratings are bad? Maybe. Were they worried that this Nexstar company and all of their affiliates were going to cause a major rift throughout the ABC network? Yeah. Probably. Were they worried that Jimmy Kimmel was going to keep going down that road and keep poking the bear and create more controversy? Yeah, probably. I don't think it's right to celebrate when someone loses their job. In this circumstance, and I'm not judging, I understand the argument. On a broadcast network, that was probably an inappropriate comment for him to make. And again, I'm using general terms because I specifically don't want to judge a fellow broadcaster. That's not my job or my place. And nor do I want Jimmy Kimmel listening to my podcast judging me for my opinions and what I said. But either way, in a broadcast setting, you're held to a different standard. Ratings were low. They weren't making any money. A network of their affiliates was ready to pull out anyway. It seems like ABC probably made a business decision here and just used the controversy of what Jimmy Kimmel said to justify the decision. Did Donald Trump pick up the phone and phone Bob Iger at Disney and say, get rid of this guy? I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not even saying it's not plausible. Just there's no evidence to indicate that. It seems more likely that Jimmy Kimmel is in this situation because Jimmy made a comment that he should not have made on network television. Again, any other place, he probably would have been fine. There's also talk that Jimmy was about to issue a statement and apologize last night had he not been canceled. I mean, that's appropriate, or that's interesting timing. Why didn't he do it on Tuesday night? Today's Thursday. I don't know. Like, I honestly feel that Jimmy believes what he said. But he's a longtime broadcaster, and he knows the rules just as well as all of the other broadcasters. There's certain things you just don't say. And it's not written down. It's sort of an unspoken rule, but I understand it. I think just about every broadcaster does. Broadcasting is a privilege. And when you upset the apple cart, when you make a comment like that, that's deeply offensive to a lot of people in a broadcast setting, I think that's how we ended up in this situation. Is this cancel culture? I don't know that it is. You know, I read a really interesting perspective on cancel culture from Dave Portnoy from Barstool Sports, who more often than not lately seems to be the voice of reason. Here is exactly what he said about cancel culture. I want to read his comment because I think it adds some pretty good context to this conversation and can add a little bit to the discussion that's happening around Jimmy Kimmel. His tweet said, "With Kimmel getting canceled, I'm seeing lots of people talking about the hypocrisy of cancel culture. To me, cancel culture is when people go out of their way to dig up old tweets and videos, etc., looking for dirt on somebody they don't like in an effort to get them fired. Like if Kimmel got canceled for stuff he did on The Man Show, that would be cancel culture. But when a person says something that a ton of people find offensive, rude, and dumb in real time, and then that person is punished for that, that's not cancel culture. That's consequences for your actions." I'm going to leave it at that. You're welcome to feel however you want to feel. I'm not here to change anybody's mind, and I want to stress that as much as I can in this podcast. I'm just trying to give you a different perspective than you're getting from the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is calling this cancel culture. They're making it seem like Donald Trump himself had him fired. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I don't think it's that likely. I think what likely happened is exactly the way the story has played out. He said something on broadcast, in a broadcast format on network television that was deeply offensive to a lot of people. And like just about every other broadcaster that had done that, they were probably reprimanded and up to and including taken off the air or losing their job. I feel sorry for Jimmy Kimmel. I disagree with him on just about everything, but I certainly do respect free speech. But in a broadcast format, there is some unspoken rules there. There is some nuance to it. And I think Jimmy probably knew that, and he knew what he was saying, and he did it anyway. And that's on Jimmy. So I'll leave it at that. Again, just a little bit of context and clarity. If you want to weigh in on it, though, feel free to message me. Just bring something new to the conversation, not the recycled stuff that I'm hearing on all of the mainstream media right now. Give me a unique perspective, and then I'll try and include that in tomorrow's listener DMs if you want to do that. Before I get to the interest rate talk, which I think is going to take up a fair bit of time here on the pod, I want to play for you exactly what that son of a bitch Tiff Macklem said yesterday when he was doing his announcement for the Bank of Canada. Before that, I want to play a little bit of question period yesterday. One of the things that I pointed out after question period on Monday is the change of tone. Pierre Poilievre seems to be a lot more calm. He seems to be a lot more measured in his questions. And I think that's good. I think that's part of the reason that he caught on as much as he did in the first place when he asked very direct and simple questions in a fairly guy next door kind of way. He got back to doing that yesterday, and he was like that on Monday as well, in fairness. The Prime Minister's tone, though, has changed. Let's hear this exchange between Pierre Poilievre and Prime Minister Carney yesterday during question period in the House of Commons.
How big is the deficit that the Prime Minister is running?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward with the Minister of Finance to releasing the budget on the 4th of November. That budget will contain the biggest investment in this country's future in a generation. Building homes, building new port infrastructure, new trade corridors, new energy infrastructure, building the strongest economy in the G7.
Well done.
All right, the Prime Minister didn't answer that question, and I'm not quite sure why, because that should be a fairly straightforward question. How much is the deficit? How much is the deficit? The Prime Minister should be able to answer that question. I mean, nobody's expecting him now, with a budget still more than 6 weeks out, to outline every line item from the budget. But a simple question like, how much money did Canada bring in last year? How much money did Canada spend last year? How much are we in deficit? Those should be no-brainers that a Prime Minister or a Finance Minister would know off the top of their heads. But we didn't get an answer to that, and you may have noticed that while Pierre Poilievre has calmed down a little bit, the Prime Minister is getting a little more animated, even shouting at times yesterday in the House of Commons. And that's very uncharacteristic of him. I'm wondering if somebody told him, you got to liven up a little bit, or you got to get into the spirit of question period and start talking loudly, like so many others have done before him. Let's hear just a little bit more of this.
The question.
Well, surely, if he was such an expert, he would know the size of his own deficit. It's now halfway through the fiscal year. 6 months have gone by, and he has announced $40 billion of additional spending. Deficits drive up inflation, grocery prices, housing costs, and interest rates. They drive out investment from our country and uncertainty that destabilizes our economy. That's why every other prime minister in Canadian history has announced the deficit at the beginning of the fiscal year. We're 6 months in. Does he even know the size of his own deficit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know many things. And one of the things I know, the member opposite, the leader of the opposition, just mentioned interest rates. One thing I know is that Canadian interest rates are much lower than American interest rates. They're lower because this country's fiscal situation is strong, because this government has a plan to grow this economy, and we will keep doing it.
I do like those direct questions from Pierre Poilievre. The question is simple. How much is the deficit? And it does put the government in a difficult position because they don't really want to answer that question. They don't want to come out and say, well, it's about 80 billion now. It'll be about 100 billion by the time the budget comes out. They don't want to say that because they don't want that soundbite out there. But that's for their political reasons. I think we as the people have a right to know that. And I think by and large, people would like to know how much is the deficit. This is a pretty big concern. How much is our deficit? And we know that nothing has been paid off on it, not since Stephen Harper was prime minister. I believe his number was 27 billion or something like that he paid off of our debt. That reduces the interest payments that we owe, and it improves our credit rating because we have less debt. This government hasn't actually paid down any debt. They're still borrowing more, and they're going to print more money when the budget comes out because they'll need more money to fulfill all of the promises. That's just a fact. Since we didn't get the deficit number at the beginning of the fiscal year, it seems appropriate that by the midpoint of September, they would at least be able to tell us what is the deficit. And they won't do that. And I feel like, again, politically, it's probably very smart. But on a taxpayer level here, and considering they work for us, I feel like we should be able to get that information. I don't know why we can't go online and look at that. The budget is supposed to be public, and even if we're working off of the last one, there should be a counter or a ticker somewhere that can tell us how much in debt we are and how much our deficit is. Very, very strange. Am I going to move on here? Is there anything else I want to play? Yeah, I think so. I'm going to play another exchange from the House of Commons yesterday. This is a Conservative member of Parliament asking a question about something that was said by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Very interesting stuff here. Listen to this exchange.
Canada's top budget watchdog has painted a dismal picture of the Prime Minister's economic record, saying, quote, the labor market sucks and wages are not going up. And it gets worse for this Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, with his big plan to split the budget into operating and capital. But the PBO is not fooled by the smoke and mirrors. He said, quote, the bottom line of government will not change. The international public sector standards that everyone uses to measure the deficit and levels of debt will not change. Turns out debt is debt, Mr. Speaker. So can the Prime Minister tell us just how much liberal debt he's adding to Canada's bottom line?
The Honourable Minister of Jobs and Families.
Mr. Speaker, in the last election only 6 months ago, Canadians chose the Liberal government. They chose the Liberal government because they know they need investment. They need investment in the big projects that are going to drive those great jobs all across the country. They need investment in the skills training that helps evolve the next generation of workers. And they need investment in food for kids, in dental care for adults, and in the many ways that our government can support Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
However, the Liberals want to try and spin their massive deficits, Mr. Speaker, the top financial watchdog in the country says there's only one bottom line, and we'll trust the PBO's word over 10 years of Liberal deficits any day, Mr. Speaker. And with this plan to split the budgets, as if the Prime Minister has forgotten that they're all linked to the same bank account, and there's really only one taxpayer. Right. So with the deficit set to double, let's just call a spade a spade. Will the Prime Minister admit he's really just cooking the books and hoping Canadians don't notice? Right on.
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister of Industry.
Good news today, the Bank of Canada has reduced interest rate to 2.5%. This is something that all entrepreneurs, all businesses are taking note, and obviously consumers as well. But we're focused on job, Mr. Speaker, and we heard across the country this summer that we needed to be there for businesses that were trying to pivot and adapt. That's why we put $5 billion on the table to help them. And meanwhile, we're going around the world attracting foreign direct investments because we need to build Canada strong. Here we go.
I mean, that was something that should have been answered by the Prime Minister or by the Finance Minister. Either one would have been fine. But neither of them answered that question, which at the end of the day was about budgets and about accounting. I think this is a real good opportunity for me to play a little bit of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Yesterday, he was speaking in Ottawa, and I thought he gave a very good explanation of how government budgets work. What the Liberals are proposing to do here is split up our budget into two. They're proposing to split up our budget into an operating budget, which is the day-to-day expenses of the government, and then a different budget, which would spend a lot. And while the operating budget would be slashed, that would be, again, jobs in the civil service, government services, things like that, they would actually be spending a ton more money in other areas for what they call investment. But what does all that mean? I know that that's a really hard concept for a lot of people to follow. So again, I thought the Parliamentary Budget Officer gave a very good explanation, and I want to play that for you now. Take just a few seconds and listen to how he explains the situation we're in and what the government is proposing to do.
Mr. Jakes, I really appreciate the fact that you recognize we are not all accountants here and that you're going to help us understand things. So in that vein, for regular Canadians, can you explain just in simple words, what the Liberals mean when they say they're going to separate an operating budget from a capital budget? Like, what changes on the books when they do that?
So to answer your last question first, the bottom line of the government will not change. So the international public sector standards that everyone uses to measure the deficit and levels of debt, that will not change. And the first reason that won't change is those are the accounting standards. The second reason is the ratings agencies won't let you change it. Like, that's the first thing they're going to go to. And if they have a sniff that somehow there's a change in presentation, you bet your boots that we're going to be paying more for debt pretty quickly. In terms of operating capital, again, we on our end, we don't know what the government precisely has in mind. So there's been no background or published on the website. In some of the communication materials, the government has mentioned the UK, the United Kingdom, who's had a similar system in place. In that situation, on the operating side, the UK includes the operating expenses that I mentioned earlier, so the traditional measure, in addition to other types of transfer payments. On the capital side, they include the traditional measure as well as transfer payments or money that's being paid out to third parties who also invest in capital. So in the case, we have a report that's going to be coming out on Thursday that looks at infrastructure spending. So the federal government transfers, over the next 5 years, I think it's going to be over $100 billion to provinces, municipalities, and First Nations to spend on infrastructure. That doesn't show up as capital spending for the federal government, but it's actually resulting in building capital assets. So that's something that they could have in mind. I don't know. I'm not inside the tent. So.
Okay, so I guess the your bottom line is debt, right? If family takes out a loan for a new roof, it's still debt, even if they call it an investment. It's and same for Ottawa, borrowing, it's still debt.
Yeah, it's absolutely still debt.
It's still debt. I thought that was a great example too. Yeah, I mean, think about this. The government wants to reclassify their investments, and it's not necessarily up to international financial accounting standards. I should know what that acronym is. In any case, it's different from how we've done it until now. And it's not clear if the international auditors would accept this new budget that we're putting forward. And it's not the same as what they're doing in the UK. This is something that Canada is doing differently from just about everybody else. But the analogy was true. What the government wants to do is if they borrow money to put a new roof on the house, they want to consider that an investment. And while sure, it is an investment into the longevity of the house because it's got a new roof, it doesn't change the fact that you borrowed the money, so it's still debt. Do you understand what I mean? I'm not sure if I'm explaining that 100% correctly, but I do think that this interim Parliamentary Budget Officer gave a pretty good explanation there that was fairly easy to understand about accounting and what the government is attempting to do with this budget that comes out on November the 4th. It's going to take a lot of going through it with a fine-tooth comb to figure out what's getting cut, what's an actual investment, and how much debt we're actually taking on. And that's something that's also on the mind of that son of a bitch, Tiff Macklem. Yesterday, he came out and made his latest interest rate announcement for the Bank of Canada. Now, full disclosure, I do not like Tiff Macklem. I don't think he's a very intelligent man. And I think that he is really enjoying the fact that him and his banker buddies are getting very, very wealthy from this interest rate situation that we're in. Keep in mind, Tiff was the guy who told everyone right before the pandemic, interest rates will remain low for the foreseeable future. But then inflation started to go up a little bit. We can debate the reason why, but either way, inflation did go up and he went bananas raising people's interest rates as quickly as possible. And you would think if he raised them that quickly to respond to inflation, he would also lower them just as quickly, and he didn't. And the reason that bugs so many people is because, one, they borrowed when the government said the interest rates are going to remain low. Don't worry about it. Go ahead and borrow. You're good. And then they raised interest rates. A lot of people felt like it was a bait and switch and like they got trapped. They also don't like the fact that so much money is going to these banks that didn't earn it. If you signed your mortgage with the bank and you agreed to pay them 1% interest, the bank was at one point totally fine with that. They agreed to it. But then Tiff just handed them 5% interest rates, and all that extra money they're bringing in is just profit for them. And it's not paying off any of your house. It also raises your monthly payment, and some people's payments have gone up so much that it's actually really affecting their cost of living. They can't maintain the same quality of life because interest rates went so crazy. I think Tiff Macklem should have been fired a long time ago. I don't think he's very good at his job, and I don't think that he's a nice person in any way. I think he's on some level enjoying watching the middle class suffer, if he even knows. He might not be able to relate to us common folk at all, and I think that that's a real shame. Here is yesterday, Governor Tiff Macklem making his announcement on interest rates.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning. I'm very pleased to be here with Senior Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers to discuss today's monetary policy decision. Today, we lowered the policy interest rate by 25 basis points to 2.5%. Through the recent period of trade upheaval, Governing Council has been proceeding carefully, paying particular attention to the risks and uncertainties facing the Canadian economy. Three developments have shifted the balance of risks since our July decision. First, Canada's labour market has softened further. Second, although there are still some mixed signals, on balance, recent data suggest upward pressures on underlying inflation have diminished. And third, with the removal of most retaliatory tariffs by Canada, there is less upside risk to future inflation. Aujourd'hui, on a réduit le taux.
All right, he's going to go into French there. I'll pick it up again when he starts again in English. Now, that's an interesting one. He says a lot's changed since July, and frankly, I don't see it. Yes, we did drop our retaliatory tariffs. That should take some of the pressure off of inflation because, of course, our retaliatory tariffs were only raising the price for Canadians. That's what a retaliatory tariff is. It's a tariff on ourselves. It's a tax on ourselves. So getting rid of that, okay, I guess that eases some inflationary pressure. But other than that, he cited the jobs market, and the jobs market has been soft for a long time. One of the things the Bank of Canada used to tell us is they had to keep raising interest rates and they wouldn't quite know if they would be effective or not until several months had gone by or even several quarters because the economy has a lagging indicator. Well, that wasn't the case when they were lowering rates. For that, they had to go very, very slow. And of course, as they were going slow, that just kept the money flowing into the coffers of the banks. If he's just now realizing that the jobs market is softening, then he is more disconnected from reality than I thought he was, because just about anybody could tell you the jobs market has not been great for quite a while. Here is more of Governor Macklem.
The bank will continue to assess the risks, look over a shorter horizon than usual, and be ready to respond to new information. So let me provide some details on what we've seen since July. After remaining resilient to sharply higher U.S. tariffs, global growth is now showing signs of slowing. U.S. consumers are cautious and employment gains have slowed. U.S. inflation has picked up in recent months as businesses appear to be passing on some tariff costs to consumer prices. In China, GDP growth was resilient in the first half of the year, but appears to be softening as investment weakens. The Canadian economy is being affected by both U.S. tariffs and the unpredictability of U.S. trade policy. GDP declined 1.6% in the second quarter, largely as expected. Exports to the United States fell sharply, both as payback from the pull forward of activity in the first quarter and because tariffs are dampening U.S. demand. Tariffs are having a profound effect on several key sectors, including auto, steel, and aluminum industries. Chinese tariffs on canola, pork, and seafood, new U.S. tariffs on copper, and higher U.S. tariffs on softwood lumber will spread the direct impacts further. Uncertainty is also weighing on the economy. Business investment contracted in the second quarter. Many businesses have told us they have paused investment plans given elevated uncertainty about U.S. trade policy. Businesses are also concerned that demand in Canada will weaken as the economic fallout broadens. There are some signs of resilience. Consumption was stronger than expected in the second quarter, and housing activity increased. But in the months ahead, low population growth and weakness in the labor market will likely weigh on household spending.
I don't think he gets how Canadians are living right now. I mean, he said a lot of stuff in there and he left one thing out that he needed to say and he didn't say it. He talked about contraction. Contraction's an interesting word because he also pointed out in the second quarter, our GDP declined almost 2%. We're in a recession. We're in a recession. To say, oh, it's a good sign that we saw activity in the housing market. Do you know why that is? Because so many people have to sell because they are so desperate because of his interest rate decisions. That's what's going on in the housing market. There's a lot of people on the sidelines that can't get into the market because of his reckless decisions with interest rates. He's dancing around this and he is painting the Mona Lisa here, doing everything he can to make it seem like, oh, things aren't that bad. No, it's all right. No, it's pretty bad, Tiff. It's really bad. And that's why so many people wanted you to go further with that interest rate cut yesterday. They wanted at least a half point and a promise that more are on the table before the year is over. That's what people wanted. The Americans dropped their interest rates as well. Well, you know, I know that there's a concern that if we drop our interest rates and they don't, that's going to drag down the Canadian dollar even further, which is good for some, but bad for a lot of other folks, namely those of us that buy directly from the States. I don't know that he really has a full, accurate snapshot of the economy and where things are and where they're going, because it seems like he's got a lot of surface numbers and never stopped to think about why these things that are happening are happening. I'm also curious about the incredible pressure on the tariff-affected sectors of the economy, steel, aluminum, autos, and things like that. The seafood was another one, he said. I mean, hey, if other countries are tariffing our seafood, I think we should probably just sell more seafood to Canadians. Make it a little cheaper here and people will buy it. But right now, those prices are quite high as well. If we're having a hard time exporting it, then you'd think we could sell it to a happy Canadian consumer for a lot less. But that's not happening. In the auto sector, Have we done anything to incentivize buying Canadian-made vehicles? I know there's a lot of conversation about Chinese EVs. I don't understand why Canadian automakers can't offer an EV at the same price point as the Chinese can. Now, I certainly got a lot of input on that yesterday on social media because I did ask that question yesterday on X, and some of the answers were very thoughtful. They explained to me that the Chinese are basically fully automated. They have a slightly cheaper labor. Some would argue very cheaper labor. It's a difference of about $3 an hour, $4 an hour, as I understand it. That's not that huge a difference. Certainly not to justify the difference in price between a Chinese-made EV and a Canadian-made EV. I think if we're going to be our own best customer, prices are going to have to come down. That's just a reality. They're going to have to. Let's get to more of Governor Macklem.
At this rate decision, there was a clear consensus to lower the policy rate for the first time since March. We will continue to assess the impacts of tariffs and uncertainty on economic activity and inflation. We're paying particularly close attention to a few things. How exports evolve given the impact of U.S. tariffs and changing trade relationships. How this spills over into business investment, employment, and household spending. How the cost effects of trade disruptions and reconfigured supply chains are passed on to consumer prices, and how inflation expectations evolve. We are focused on ensuring that Canadians continue to have confidence in price stability through this period of global upheaval. We will support economic growth while ensuring inflation remains well controlled.
Just before he continues, I don't understand. I keep hearing the government say that things are great. The government says things are fine and we've got the best trade deal with America in the world. He's talking about global upheaval, and frankly, I'm not seeing it. I know that it's different than it used to be. Some things are being tariffed, and that is increasing cost. And in some cases, that cost is being passed on to the consumer. But generally speaking, around here, I don't find the average person is really feeling the impact of tariffs. It seems like he's very disconnected. You know, he's reading from a playbook instead of reading from the room and what's actually happening on the ground. There's a big disconnect there, and I can't quite put my finger on it. Let's get to a little bit of the Q&A here. I'm just going to play one or two questions.
Okay, Greg Quinn from Market News, please.
Good morning to you both. You are cutting interest rates, as you say, with core inflation at 3%, the top of your band. You're also looking at wider measures, and you say that those are 2.5%. You know, given how upset Canadians were when inflation jumped after the pandemic, aren't you taking some kind of a risk here with inflation pressures?
Well, Greg, I do want to underline that, as you said, Canadians remain concerned about the cost of living. And our primary mandate is to maintain low, stable inflation, and we are very focused on that. I mean, total inflation is 1.9%. It's been running slightly below 2% since April, largely as a result of the elimination of the consumer carbon tax. If you look at, yes, you know, trim and median are running around 3%. As I indicated in response to Paul's question, if you look at the more recent monthly readings, they're running around, you know, if you look at like the 3-month moving average, it's about 2.5%. And if you look at a range of other core measures, you look at like traditional exclusion measures, CPIX, food and energy, CPIX, they're 2.4, 2.6. If you look at the percentage of components of the CPI that are rising faster than 3, it's roughly about where it is when inflation's around 2.5%. So when we look at it, we see underlying, you know, headline inflation's 1.9, underlying's running about 2.5. Some of that upward momentum we saw has eased off. So yes, you know, we do need to consider where inflation is going. At this point, inflationary pressures look a little more contained, and against that background and the background of a weakening economy that will put additional downward pressure on inflation, that tipped the balance of risks in favor of cutting our policy rate today.
Before he finishes this, my God, could this be any more convoluted? He is spinning himself around in circles to the point where he's going to get dizzy and fall off that stupid chair soon. Here's the reality. The governor said it himself right there. The Bank of Canada is only interested in inflation. It's our job to have slow and steady inflation and control it. Well, they've done a piss poor job at doing that, haven't they? Terrible job at controlling inflation because inflation is still out of control. They had no regard whatsoever for the middle class and people that are trying to pay a mortgage and live their life. They had no regard for them whatsoever when they were going nuts raising those interest rates. No regard at all. Anytime somebody said, hey, listen, this is real unaffordable for the Canadian people, what you're doing here, they shot it down and they said, well, that's a government problem. We're only here to control inflation. Now he's saying, well, you know, the cost of living, there's a lot of pressure on people right now. Why are you bringing that up now? Because you didn't care about that sort of thing before, Mr. Macklem. If inflation is going up, which it did just the other day, it went from 1.7 to 1.9. And as maybe you were able to understand it, maybe you weren't. It was a real convoluted answer. But the headline inflation is 1.9. The actual inflation in the sectors that matter to people is higher. Okay, when inflation went up, you cut rates, yet when inflation was down, you refused to cut rates. He said it himself. First time since April, they've cut rates, even though inflation has been in their own target. So they've artificially been keeping these rates high because we got to control inflation. We knew in January that tariffs were coming. Didn't seem to be a factor there. Everything was, let's just wait and see. Let's just wait and see. Here's my message to the Bank of Canada. Cut those rates. You said rates would stay low for a long time. People took you at your word. I guess we were all stupid for believing them. But you said rates would stay low. If you had to raise them to get inflation under control, and basically what that means is they have to take as much money out of the pockets of the middle class, because if the middle class has money, they go out and spend, and then that bids up prices because it creates a demand. That's exactly what they do. They suck as much money as they can out of people's pockets because they don't want them to spend it. It's completely ridiculous. It's an ass-backwards system, but that's what the Bank of Canada does. How come it took so long to lower interest rates even after interest rates were at their target or below their target for inflation? Because they're making money off of this. Banks are getting extremely wealthy off of this, and it's not fair to the middle class. We got completely screwed. We got fleeced, and it continues because these rates are still higher than they need to be right now. Governor Macklem said he sees the economy softening. He's right. And as more and more people lose their jobs, it's going to get worse. That is that son of a bitch, Tiff Macklem there answering some questions. I don't even think I want to hear the rest because, frankly, I don't think he really understands what the middle class is going through. I don't think he understands how time sensitive this is and how quickly people need relief from these insane interest rates, which is one of the number one things that caused inflation is the cost of housing, thanks to his interest rates. Friends, tomorrow is a listener DM special. Again, if you want to send in a DM, send it at Scott Fox On Air. I've already got a lot for tomorrow, but if something great comes in today and I can find a way to fit it in, I will, but I really can't take too many more, but I still want to hear from you. So regardless of whether or not I use it tomorrow, I'd still love to hear from you. Feel free to slide into my DMs. Go Bills. They're taking on the Dolphins tonight, and hopefully I'll be in a great mood with a Bills win when I talk to you tomorrow. Have a great Thursday and see you in less than 24 hours. To end things off, as always, Pat James and The Whole Truth. This song is called Hey Now.